one of the reasons I think that a lot of these fandoms become so toxic is that they're trying to force something into a box where there's no box. If that makes sense. I think Star Wars gets it so much because Star Wars has a lot of Buddhism in it via Kurosawa films. And I don't think George Lucas entirely understood what he was replicating, because he was copying in a lot of time, not synthesizing. And so, you know, there's that infamous Dave Filoni quote that y'all know I love, that Star Wars continuity is George Lucas. And I knew George Lucas talking about him like he's dead. But that was,
I mean, in terms of modern Star Wars.
I mean, yes, George Lucas is not involved anymore, but he can still pick up the phone and say, hey, George, what do you think about this?
Yeah.
And I mean,
there is a story, I believe it's from Kevin J. Anderson, who was working on one of the EU books, and he sent it into the editor, and the editor was like, why are you talking like Han Solo was a drug smuggler? And Anderson was like, because he was, you know, spice. And the editor was like, no, spice is just like table spice.
Yeah.
They had to have a meeting with George Lucas. The editor was like, so the drugs, right? And Anderson said Lucas looked at him like he was stupid. It was just like, it's space heroin.
Yeah.
Why? What is wrong with you that you didn't realize this?
Well, I mean, spice comes from Dune as well. It's a hallucinogenic drug. Now we didn't know exactly what spice was in Star Wars, but that's an old sci-fi fantasy trick.
You have a smuggler. He's taking some undefined substance.
Yeah, what exactly do people smuggle?
Why would he be smuggling table salts?
Well, I mean, there have been instances where they did that, but let's face it, that's not what he was doing. The fact that Han Solo started off as a disreputable character really got lost. I have this issue with Star Wars increasingly being a universe that rewards bad people for doing one good thing. And unfortunately, some of the orthodoxy of thinking in the fandom is starting to reflect the writing. And I have people love to helpfully tell me that the Mandalorians were based on Jews. As like, oh, great. We're violent mercenaries for hire. You want to do that now? Well, that's not the intention in the 90s. It's like, we know what he said in the 90s, and they've since said, I probably shouldn't have said that because it's been misinterpreted. And yet they continue to repeat.
Of course.
And here's the thing. In fairness, people have pointed out, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just want to make sure I do this point so people don't get mad at me for this, because they're going to get mad at me for something.
Yeah.
But people have pointed out to me that the various Star Wars creative teams have been exceptionally wishy-washy on this issue. And this is a problem, that they want the brownie points. They want the good people points when it's convenient, and then they back away from it when they get into trouble. Now, anti-Semitism is one of those things that is very complicated, and a lot of people spread anti-Semitic talking points without realizing what they're doing, because the people it originates from are very, very good at hiding it. So I believe there was no ill intent there. And I think it's really important. And this is an example of me, much like all the gender identity stuff, I really slow down and I'm very careful in how I present something, because I don't want to contribute to the toxicity just because a particular thing hits a sensitive point for me. And I just think that if 75% of people did that, we'd be much better off. The problem is when people want the rules completely changed because their feelings are hurt.
Mhm.
And that I think that's how the dialogue got poisoned. I'd love to be able to change it to poisonous fandoms, because it really is. We're all just getting the life squeezed out of us through these things that we used to take. I get the comfort argument, right? It's
Mhm.
not just nostalgia. There are properties that did, like you said, it's an identity thing. You were
Mhm.
spot on, because they helped us figure out who we are.
Mhm.
The problem is that people are inverting cause and effect on this one. That piece of media did not make you who you are.
Mhm.
That piece of media helped you understand who you are based on the same different game that 4 to 6 year olds, well, 2 to 6 year olds, but I hope 2-year-olds aren't watching that much media. They're engaging with people, but they
I always assumed that like four to six is when most people get into Star Wars. But my best friend was like, no, I saw it for the first time when I was like 2. And I'm like, okay, so we actually started watching it about the same time. I was 6, you were 2.
I remember it was this big thing that my parents were like, okay, you're old enough to see Star Wars now. And it was between Empire and Jedi, because they let me watch the first 2 movies before Return of the Jedi came out. Return of the Jedi came out in, I believe, 80. Well, I should look it up instead of getting it wrong, because people will get mad at me for that one. But
You're such a fake fan. You don't know when it came out.
Well, yeah, I was
83.
Yeah, it was 83.
Yeah.
So I would have been 4. And I just Yoda, R2D2, I loved the creatures. But the character, I was like, this, because when we're kids, we all look for what one analyst called the U-shaped box in a work. It is, at that age, unlike adults, and I think adults do find characters they relate to, but it's not as essential for that development of where you fit in the world. If you're an adult, and this may be some of the problem with the fandoms, if you're an adult that hasn't figured out where you fit in the world and how you relate to things outside yourself, you're gonna have reactions you don't understand to things.
And I mean, I've seen people online try to say Jessica Rabbit is asexual. My headcanon is that she's asexual. And that brings something up in me because, Jessica was what helped me be comfortable with my sexuality. And I'm not talking about sexual attraction, just me as a sexual person.
But I mean, that would mean that her marriage to Roger, well, no, not necessarily. I mean, if they wanna say she is in, okay, there's a difference between saying she is in my head and this is objective fact.
Yeah. And that's, like I said, for me, it's like I have strict rules when it comes to fan fiction. Does this make sense with the canon? And like I wrote a lot of stories that were in alternate universes. So like it's Disney and DreamWorks characters as superheroes or in a space opera. That's an alternate universe.
Okay.
And I would get people who would come to me and they'd be like, I usually really don't like AU stories, but I really like yours for some reason.
The world building is more solid.
That it's, I did my world building, but also I would genuinely sit down and think, okay, what would the character actually be like in this setting?
Right.
What about the character is just part of who they are, and how much of it is external factors, and what happens when you change some of those external factors.
Right. I'm laughing because I almost got in big trouble at work over a gay Batman Joker /fic that I contributed to based on that principle.
You were telling me that story.
Oh yeah, that's I don't want to interrupt you. We can tell that story if people think it's funny, but go on. I just wanted to explain why I was laughing. I was not laughing at song. I was laughing at where my brain went on that one.
No. So it's, so for me, it's like, okay, here are the parameters. And that's one thing why I think fan fiction can actually be a great place to start for new writers,
Oh yeah.
is because you first learn the rules while operating inside a sandbox.
Yep.
You know, the story has set certain parameters, you work within those, and then you can learn how to set your own parameters for your story.
Yep.
The thing is, a lot of fan fiction writers, even some who have since gone on to write original stories, they never learned how to follow. They were just like, oh, I want to write a fan fiction and I want it to be like this, and I don't care. I'm just going to do whatever I want. So because they didn't learn how to work within those boundaries of canon, then they go off and they write their stories, and they can't make their own rules, let alone follow their own rules. And then the world building completely falls apart, because it's like, wait, you said this, so why are you breaking this rule now? And your story does not make any sense.
Yeah, was it Brandon Sanderson that said that like the limits and costs of magic are more interesting than the powers? I think he said something like that. That's a rule a lot of writers don't get.
Sounds like something he would say.
Yeah.
I'm not a huge Brandon Sanderson fan. Just his writing doesn't work for me.
The way he explains concepts though is really useful.
He knows what he's doing, and he is very good at teaching it.
Yeah.
You know, one thing he's talked about is depth versus width in your world building, which is, instead of taking your world building and just having all these surface level things, go deep with it. And Patricia C. Reedy wrote this it's this massive thing about world building. I don't remember if it's a questionnaire or an essay, but it's in depth. Okay, what's the religion? What are the marital systems? What are this? What are that? And it's actually addressing, you know, how all these things can influence the little aspects of your stories, and how all these things can affect other aspects of the world building. And that to me is so fascinating. And that's why it's frustrating when I see so many writers nowadays who are just like, oh, I'm going to write this fun little story. And I'm like, okay, but even if you're writing something light and that's basically pulpy, which is what I compare my own writing to.
Pulp. Okay.
Yeah. You still need to have parameters, and you still need to know what you're doing.
Okay.
Because it has to work. You know, I talk about how it's like, once you know the rules, then you can break them.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you have to break them deliberately. You can't just break the rules and have it work.
That's the subjective versus objective thing again, right? Like, I think that's a big thing where a lot of things go wrong, because if you have rules and you're playing within the rules and someone says, well, I have a problem with this, you can cite, okay, here's all the places I set it up. You're combating a subjective criticism with objective, well, I didn't break the rules of my own universe. It's my universe. I'm sorry, who are you? And I think that's valid. And I mean, okay, locus of power in these things is a big issue, but I want to stay on the subjective versus objective thing again.
Okay, but I just want to say this. I read a book recently where one of the main characters' he had a ship, it was named the Kraken.
Okay.
About 12 hours into this 20-hour book, it says, oh yeah, he was a son of the sea who could speak to all the creatures, especially the Kraken in the deep. And I'm like, wait, are you foreshadowing that the Kraken is going to show up? The Kraken did not actually show up. It was just, oh, the villain was fed to the Kraken off screen. And I was so mad. I'm like, so one, you needed to start foreshadowing that sooner.
Yeah.
Two, how dare you not actually show me the Kraken?
Yeah, that's the subverting expectations thing that I think
it was even that. It was just like, oh, it was a romance novel where, like, it was actually, I enjoyed it more than some, but a lot of the action happened off screen. where
Mhm.
it's like, oh, look, suddenly all the bad people are dead. And I'm like, I'm sorry, why am I here?
Now is in romance, because I admit I don't read a lot of it.
Mhm.
Is there sort of a rule, like you're allowed to have less overt, earth-shattering conflict? It's more like, oh, this person is forcing me to marry this person I don't want to marry, or something like that. Is that something inherent to the genre?
So, but when you start bringing in fantasy elements and
Yes.
doing
Yeah, yeah,
fantasy
yeah.
romance, then you do need to put a little more effort into the fantasy aspects.
Yeah, because sometimes I think those smaller conflicts, you can get your arms around them, and therefore they feel more meaningful
I,
to
I
me.
think I think part of the problem is that the a lot of writers will then take the easy way out, and so the third act conflict becomes a breakup. Like,
Okay.
this even happens in Bridgerton. This happens in so many stories, and I see so many romance readers who are like, there's been a discussion recently of, if you say no third act breakup as part of the trope, I don't want to read any more books with a third act breakup. Put it in the thing so I know what I'm getting, and so I know this is something I want to read.
Okay.
And so there is this debate. No, it's a spoiler, but it's like, I don't really care about spoilers, just because every Hallmark movie does this. It is the most basic conflict you can put in a romance story.
Okay.
And I'm so sick of it.
It is sort of, I don't know, like I'm not an expert on this genre,
Yeah.
but it does, I mean, this is another, when we talk about tropes, overuse of a trope does not mean a trope is bad.
Yeah.
And
And I
I
think
yeah,
that's the problem with the third act breakup, is it's so overused.
right. Right.
Whereas
And
like,
that, again, fair comment.
mhm.
And if people are sick of it, um the spoiler thing is just basic descriptions of what happens in your story are not spoilers unless it's a massive plot twist, or
Mhm.
the limiter on spoilers has been taken off so much that it's gotten absurd. But I know some people who want nothing spoiled,
Yeah.
and it's the sort of thing of, I want to know what I'm watching. When I want a certain amount of expectation set, so I can tell whether there's a reasonable chance that I may like this.
Mhm.
And too often now, everything is so secretive in marketing that I just can't get a sense. And it's the whole spoiler fetish. It's the obsession over spoilers. And it's like, if your story can't survive your basic plot setup being revealed, something's really wrong.
Well, it's like the new Disney animated movie Wish that's coming out. What is that movie about?
Well, I think Strange Worlds was hurt by that too. People didn't know what that movie was about. All they heard was gay character.
I mean, I saw one review of that where the reviewer said, I wasn't going to watch it, but my niece wanted to watch it. And then about 3/4 of the way through the movie, he realized his niece was in the kitchen watching her mother cook because she didn't care about the movie and was bored. So,
Okay. So it was sort of lacking.
yeah.
I mean, I think that was at least partially a COVID movie,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm not sure. But yeah, that, I mean, there's an example again, and I'm really focused on this subjective versus objective point, because I think that identity bit that you brought up, I think this might be a real core of why fandoms go poisonous, they go toxic, because it
Mm-hmm.
becomes the subjective headcanon overtakes the objective, this is what it is actually in the story. This is what is potentially implied or inferred or something.
Mm-hmm.
And too many, I had somebody go bonkers on me on The Little Mermaid earlier today because I put up a cheeky thing about it tanking in the box office in China. And part of the reason is that Chinese state media decided it was going to fail. And so it put out its talking points via, it made it clear that the correct answer was to not see this movie. And the quote was, "This isn't racism. This is just okay, come on. You're complaining about a black Ariel. You're not saying why it doesn't work." But this guy, for some odd reason, decided to run with this and claim that the Hollywood Reporter was accusing all Chinese people of being racist. And that was facts, not in evidence. And I got the clearly implied, which there's no such thing.
Okay. I'm going to say something as someone who has actually seen the movie.
Yeah.
Haley Bailey is great. I question her parents' naming decisions, but okay, whatever. Haley is fantastic. Her abs are amazing. Her voice is incredible, and she absolutely sells it. She has this wide-eyed awe that is absolutely adorable.
So, in other words, she was the right person for the part, irrespective of race.
Yes. The movie itself is meh. They cast Javier Bardem as King Triton, and I was sitting there going, cast Jason Momoa, you cowards.
Maybe
but
he
then
wasn't
I had
available. Yeah.
Had a better thought. Cast Tamara Morrison, you cowards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that's interesting because, you saw the movie and you formed an opinion. Yeah.
It's okay.
And you formed an opinion. And everybody who's seen it, I admit, I was all stoked to see it. And then I saw CGI Sebastian and went, nope. I'll watch it.
Yeah.
I'll watch it at home. That CGI is just gonna creep me out way too badly.
Yeah. It's I'm a fan of The Little Mermaid Broadway, which I actually get to see in a few months. I'm so excited. So, I'm a fan of that, and there's a lot of lore they added into that, including so the idea of Triton and Ursula as siblings was something that they had considered when they made the original 89 animated movie.
Okay.
There was even a deleted verse in the Fathoms Below opening number that talks about it. And then for the Broadway, they brought it back, which is something they did with a lot of the musicals. So they brought that back, and they actually expanded on it with this whole lore that, Triton and Ursula are the children of Poseidon, and he divided their power between them. But, she was murdering people right and left and using black magic. And so Triton had to overthrow her. And now that's why she was banished.
So it makes Triton seem like less of a dick.
And it also adds some great lore. And I love lore. And so when they said for the movie, oh, hey, they're bringing this element back in, I was like, okay, cool. Oh, Melissa McCarthy was fantastic. By the way, she was incredible as Ursula. I loved her.
That's great, because I was disappointed they didn't cast Lizzo. But if you say she's good, then, fair.
Yeah. And so I wanted them to actually do something with the sibling element like the show did, and bring in that whole power of Poseidon and all that. Especially, they keep talking about Ariel's voice as her siren song. And I'm like, is this some kind of special gift? Like, is this a special power that only some mermaids are born with? And they never do anything with it, and they never clarify. And I'm like, give me lore, darn it.
Yeah, that's an interesting.
I needed that more than I needed the prince being adopted, which
okay that I admit, as it went on, I've seen you know what, the Little Mermaid is just one of those things that it took on a life of its own.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it does that, and it stops making sense after a certain point. It becomes about the fight.
Mm-hmm.
And self-awareness is a really important thing. And I think too many people, um, in so many parts of life, they're just so overstretched, and they can't admit it because they think it's weakness, as opposed to being human limitations that we claim make characters interesting, but then we can't accept in ourselves. Strange that. But they can't admit, as I did earlier, something bothered them for very personal reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of separating, okay, what do I feel versus what can I prove? And can I form a through line? They just, well, I have a feeling you have to validate my opinion, because if you don't, you're invalidating my feelings. No, that doesn't work that way.
And here's the thing, I had something happen. This whole week has been crazy, but I had something happen at the beginning of the week where my best friend and I had a bit of a disagreement. And I was very hurt. And at first, I thought I was mad. And then
you were hurt, right?
Yeah, I sat with it for a bit and had to deal with it. And I'm like, no, I'm not mad. I don't want to claw anyone's eyes out. I don't want to poison anyone. I'm just hurt.
I love that that's your definition of mad, by the way. I really approve of that. The approve was a joke, guys. I don't approve of adults' decisions. Yeah. But yeah, so, that's funny. Yeah.
And so it's like, okay. And I think there are a lot of people hurt and they lash out and they think they're angry and it looks like anger, but that's not it. It's just they don't know how to deal with their own pain.
I agree. I've tried to empathize with people where I get that sense that something has deeply hurt them.
Mm-hmm.
And I say, I get that you're hurt. I just need to take it down a notch. And they treat the empathy as an attack, as if it's insulting to empathize with a person's hurt. And I have no idea what to do about that problem, because then this happened with the Little Mermaid guy as well, that I said, look, you're allowed to not like something, just you have to deal in facts. Like, I get that you're upset, but and just you're accusing me of, he called me saying it was something very strange. It was an attempt to empathize, and he called it an epithet. And I was like, okay, points for the use of the word epithet, but this is not the correct context. And I have no idea what to do about the fact that people have been trained to be emotionally stunted. I mean, that's a big element of U.S. political fighting now.
Oh, yeah.
Is you've got different groups of people looking for reasons to deflect badness. I'm not, I think a lot of people feel like a failure for various reasons. And I don't know why people get this sense that there's a point around 30 where all of a sudden anyone settles into this comfortable life where they feel completely secure and everything. It's not life. It would be very, very boring. As somebody who started over in different career trajectories multiple times, most recently when I was 40, It's good. You know, it's good to have second, third, fourth, fifth acts. 5-act structure is good.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like so many people have had such expectations put on them that they need to flee into these fictional worlds.
Mm-hmm.
And then when those fictional worlds disappoint them, it's this displaced trauma response. And I say this as somebody who I know that some of my reactions to some of my reactions to the Marvel stuff was because I knew what Joss Whedon was about and I knew that wasn't an accident.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think I know based on what I was told about the guy from people he abused, that was deliberate. And that was an example of him making a point. I'm going to use a word that is so clever, I'm going to sneak a word that shouldn't be in a movie like this past everybody. I am a genius. I am superior. Fuck you, women. You know, and it all comes down to, he said this himself, he can't control himself where women are concerned. And he blames women. And we have an entire universe of heroism with a lot of influence from a guy like that.
Yeah.
Of course, there's going to be toxicity. There's just underlying, and this isn't even, well, I think in some cases it is messaging on his part. Let's face it. Joss Whedon, and this is bizarre to say, but it's true. Joss Whedon has influenced modern pop feminism.
Oh, absolutely.
And, you know, when we talk about indoctrination, when we talk about deprogramming, some of these sex negative feminists who worship Joss Whedon have to deprogram themselves from the shit that worshiping his stuff put in their head, the shame surrounding sex. I recommend binge watching the series Charmed. It's from around the same time. It's much better in terms of women and sense of self and women making choices and so on and so forth.
I mean, it just occurred to me that it's like, you know, you've talked about the issue in Buffy where, you know, she and Angel have sex and suddenly he's evil.
Yeah.
Because whatever. It's like
because he became happy. Like, oh dear God.
And I feel like that that would probably have a lot of influence on young minds. Like, oh, sex is bad. Yep. It's like they probably don't even. And you know, one thing I'm grateful for growing up in Christianity the way I did is, you know, I did learn about media literacy and how things like that can affect. And that's just because, you know, my introduction to culture analysis was focus on the family's media division. Ooh. And like they had a specific area that it was like reviewing and talking about just culture. And
whenever I was down in the US, I used to go into places and grab the pamphlets because I wanted to see it.
Yeah. And so it's like, even if I don't agree with the standards they put stuff on, at least I learned how to analyze stuff.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. Okay. I also learned that there is a huge blind spot in Christians for James Bond, which there's a lot to analyze there.
Yeah, but, I mean, James Bond. I think we could do an entire episode on James Bond and how, you know, how to modernize characters that are products of that era.
But here's the thing: maybe don't, because
I mean that's the other option, right?
Yeah, because like one of the things you talked about in that makes a toxic fandom is an IP that has overstayed its welcome or has gone on too long. Mm-hmm. And I understand what you say about trademarks are expensive, yada, yada. But, you know, here's the thing. I remember back on Tumblr seeing a picture someone did of an Egyptian mermaid, just like sitting on the shores of the Nile, Egyptian. I don't know what their clothes were called, but very Egyptian. And I'm like, I would watch that movie. And so then they started with like, they announced Haley Bailey as Ariel, and I'm like, okay. And I've said I'm not a huge fan of race bending. I do think there are times where it's done just to get diversity points, but I'm like, okay, but why can't we just make a new story about another mermaid and do something different?
Well, yeah, well, you could tell they could have done The Little Mermaid and told a completely different story, but let's face it, the purpose of the exercise there was to refresh a copyright.
Yes.
So
And
there's yeah.
They have live action Ariel at the Disney parks right now. I think it's limited time. But I see like Instagram videos of Black women who get to see her, and they have the exact same reaction I had to everything in the parks.
Right. Right. And now that you've had that experience, you get it.
And I'm like, it's given me a new understanding and appreciation for representation, but at the same time, it does also have higher standards for your representation, please.
See, I think that's a fair comment that, okay, they tried with Tiana, it didn't quite take, but I do also think there's a real blind spot in yeah, go ahead.
Something that's been pointed out is pretty much every POC character Disney's done spends about 2/3 of their movie as an animal.
Whoa, yikes.
Because you have Tiana who turns into a frog, you have Cusco who turns into a llama, you have Brother Bear where the main character turns into a bear.
Wow.
That's kind of a pattern.
And then you've got the African myth in the Lion King and the Jungle Book. Oh,
I don't
boy.
think I don't think either of those fall into the same category because it's a story being told with an animal. But when it's the POC character deliberately being turned into an animal, yeah, that's a pattern.
The other problem, and it's weird because Black Panther addressed this problem and then they swung back again. I have clients, they are European immigrants from Africa, and they talk to me about how the stories they're connecting to are stories featuring Asian people more than Black people, because they get into that being torn between two worlds, because it's an immigrant or children of immigrant story as opposed to the descendants of slaves Black person that the US is I get why this is a thing, but and there's more than one way to be Black.
And there was one review I saw of The Little Mermaid where it was saying, oh, the lack of slavery in the story is a problem.
Oh, it's the same thing they did to the Woman King.
Yeah. And
they didn't spend the whole time dealing with the horrors of slavery.
And I mean, it was one thing because like I saw a lot of the right with the Women King who were saying, but these people are slavers. Why are they glorifying the slavers?
Well, they didn't see the movie.
Yeah. And it is that thing where it's like, okay, calm down to.
Well, also, the Woman King is a movie about women who rose in a society that was trying to segregate them and keep them down. And I liked the theme of the fact that these were, it was the society itself that was creating these rules, and Viola Davis's character having to not just go out and be a badass in battle, but she had to navigate the politics of her culture. And that's addressed by the movie. People refuse to see it because people's minds have been so made up when it came out. There are some incredible performances by the actresses in that film, and they didn't get due credit for it because of the stink on it. And that's I hurt for them, because their achievement is being derailed by politics.
And you know, that's one of the things, is something I've been saying for a while is, you know, race bending in a fictional story, okay, that's one thing. I still don't like it. But when it's historical people, like Black Anne Boleyn, why? And
Well,
this whole thing with Cleopatra now, which I'm
okay. I think there's a difference between race bending and Hamiltoning something.
true. For me, it's like I'm not, because here's the thing, even with Hamilton, I saw debate among fans of, were white people allowed to cosplay characters that were played by POC?
Well, yeah, that is that's an ongoing debate. I know for children, the standard is, if a white kid wants to cosplay the Falcon, or if a kid wants to be dressed up as Black Panther, as long as they're not doing blackface, it's fine. If they love the character, if they love the character.
Yeah. And for me, I'm like, look, if a little Black girl can dress up as Elsa, then a little white girl can dress up as Moana.
Yes, I do think that people, there's how do I put this? There's being considerate, and then there's being politically correct.
Yeah. And one thing I was trying to say was, it's like, something like the Woman King is something we need more of, because if you want to talk about what women of color throughout history have contributed, tell those stories.
Right.
And it's like, no, they're not as familiar as Anne Boleyn is now, but if you start telling those stories, they can become that. And
well, I mean, there's a woman who came from the Dahomey. I retweeted this through African and Black history. There's a great account, but there's a woman who came from the Dahomey, was sold to an Englishman, ended up in Queen Victoria's court. Queen Victoria ended up being the godmother to her daughter. Where's that movie? I mean, they put out a movie about the Chevalier de Saint Georges, which should have got more hype, but I'm not sure. I think it was because it was a costume drama.
And but I think people just need to start putting those stories out there and building it.
It's very hard because, again, the toxicity of the debate, especially when it involves Black women, there is no winning. I see the crap Black women take from all sides. The minute, like, they can just voice a personal preference and they've got people jumping on them for political reasons. I have people saying to me nearly weekly, because I'm attracted to a particular type of person, am I racist? It's like, oh, we have made everyone so messed up. We are doing the opposite of healthy self-concept. We are doing the opposite of proper identity building. This is a disaster.
Well, I found it funny with the whole Cleopatra on Netflix thing, which is like, one, Nefertiti is right there. What are you doing?
Yeah,
but it's fascinating to see that, Egypt was saying, hey, don't appropriate our culture, essentially.
Egypt, I had an issue with that one also, because I don't know if you remember, Gal Gadot was making a movie about similar subject matter, and it was
supposed to be a Cleopatra movie.
They flipped out the other way. And at the time they pointed out she was Macedonian.
And, you know, that's what I don't think Egypt was the one complaining about Gal Gadot in that
Oh, they were.
situation.
They were
Oh,
because she's Israeli.
oh yeah, that would do it. But you know, it was interesting seeing, you know, the director of the Cleopatra is like, oh, it's just because Egypt is racist, which that one was a bit odd
Well,
to
it's
me.
funny because I remember back in the day. This is why I'm sort of like, I'm so tired, because this is not a new thing.
No.
I remember Michael Jackson did a video back in the day called Remember the Time. And the art direction on that video was based on the Nubian dynasty in Egypt. And it was like Iman and Magic Johnson as Pharaoh and his queen. And people epically lost their shit. So this has always happened. This is not a new phenomenon. And when people start going on about it's the woke Star Trek thing that cracks me up, because the original Star Trek was so, not only was it so preachy in a very 60s way, but it was the first interracial kiss on American television.
The kiss heard
That,
around the world.
yep, that was woke. It just, it is so strange to me how people, and it's what you've identified. It's that people come at things through their own biases. We come at things through our own flaws. And we get very defensive when something that we're going into for entertainment makes us feel bad. And I am no exception to this. I go in when there was a long period of time for me where when something had a very, like the Disney movies back in the day, the Ariel and Belle and all that stuff, I always felt bad watching those movies when I was younger, because they never, up until Lilo and Stitch, there was never a girl, and I was an adult when Lilo and Stitch came out. But the girl in those movies was always very feminine. And so I'd watch those and just feel wrong. And I, you know, there's a reason I went into gender study and went into women's studies in university, okay? It was because I was tired of being told I was bad. Unfortunately, I continued to be told I was bad by women's studies programs. Like, I couldn't win. But that's when I was like, all right, maybe this isn't a problem with the material. Maybe this is a lack of self-acceptance in me. And maybe I need to explore, because Buffy, being in the 90s and being in, that's why the whole girls in sports thing hits me differently, because I did basketball in middle school. I ran track until I hit puberty, and that was ended for perhaps obvious reasons. But you know, I ran track then. I was in competitive swimming. I was a competitive dancer. I looked a bit like Gina Carano in The Mandalorian.
I can see that.
And I got called fat all the time, because at the time, what was popular? The waif, Kate Moss, you know? And so I got it in my head that women like that were the enemy. I blamed them for the competition that society created. And then, you know, the whole backlash against the Disney princesses started. And at first I was right on board. But then I started looking at it and going, wait a minute, like Belle's defining, the thing about the Disney princesses is they all do something. They take stories that, let's face it, the originals were very much about, oh, they're these great beauties, and that's why the evil queen is after them, and made it more about their character. Every Disney princess has a definitive character point that makes them special. And the movies, the movies are about Ariel's interest and ambition. Belle's weird. Belle's a weirdo. They established that in the first damn song.
Yeah.
And she doesn't, I think the whole, I don't want to just get married and continue the tradition. That's, I don't know why the people going Disney's gone woke didn't pick up on that fact. The Little Mermaid has been a metaphor for interracial dating for a while, folks. And the fairy tales have always been railing against the stay in the cave response. And what's interesting is that fairy tales started as the exact opposite. Fairy tales were the reason you didn't go out in the woods after dark. Why you didn't wander too far from the village. It was all because some monster's going to eat you. At the end of those fairy tales, a lot of those girls died.
Yeah.
In the original Little Mermaid, she don't make it out. And so the idea that this changing of stories to suit modern sensibilities, that's been going on since film was started. There's a lot of stories that, are you aware of the way people freaked out that Walt Disney would dare to adapt Alice in Wonderland?
I did not know about that.
Oh, it was ugly. Look it up. It'll take too long. That was one of those ones that they were just like, nope, this can't be done. This is a desecration. This is literature. It shouldn't be a talking animal cartoon.
And he tried for years, because even back when he was trying to do live action in his early 20s, he tried to do an Alice in Wonderland movie then.
And let's face it, part of the reason that book is so beloved is because the Disney films were an entry point. Now, the novels themselves are much more complicated and nuanced, but of course, that doesn't make the film bad. I like when it's like, okay, we can have both. We can have the film, which is its own thing, and the books, which are their own things. Yeah. And Walt Disney created a really good entry point into those stories. And even though I prefer the books to the movie, I completely see as valid his adaptation. But he adapted. Shakespeare adapted. Othello was controversial. Black protagonist. Moorish protagonist. For people who don't know, Moorish means Muslim. And Robin Hood. When they put Morgan Freeman in Robin Hood for the Kevin Costner movie? And people, I
think that was before my time.
Okay, well, people were like, oh, they're adding that. No, that character was in the original stories. It had been taken out because of Jim Crow. And the fact that Kevin Costner movie put that back in, those movies were not good, except for Alan Rickman. But they were enjoyable. They were enjoyable. And if you look at, people said that Star Trek 4 was absurd because there's no way a man with a Czechoslovakian accent would have been allowed to run around a U.S. nuclear site. If a guy who spoke like Chekhov was going up to people in Cold War America and saying, I'm looking for the nuclear vessel, someone would have called the FBI. This has always happened. And I do think some of the reason that fandoms are so toxic is that people are incredibly ignorant of history.
Yes.
That they don't understand what a scandal Mary Shelley's Frankenstein was and why she originally published that book anonymously. Because women didn't do those things. And one of the reasons Shelley was Shelley is that she was the descendant of Mary Wollstonecraft, who was one of the proto-feminists. And women didn't write, period. Novels were seen as things that rotted women's brains.
Even Jane Austen published her work anonymously, written by a lady.
Yeah.
The only reason we know who she is because her brother couldn't keep his mouth shut.
Yeah, because writing was considered a tawdry, any profession. For women over a certain age was a problem, but writing novels were junk.
Even the Bronte sisters had to publish under male pseudonyms at first.
Yeah. So anybody who thinks this stuff is new, anybody who thinks these fights are new, I say this with all the kindness I can muster, it's just ignorant.
Mm-hmm.